great to be here with you today, chatting about buyer inquiry. And a lot of the time, I think agents put energy and effort into open homes and also the open home follow-up. But there's a fair bit of inquiry that comes through both from an email point of view off the various websites and also from a phone inquiry, either off a signboard or someone's literally just interested in that particular property. So it's a different kind of lead, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Around the buyer. How about we talk about the phone inquiry and about some of your sort of philosophy and way of dealing with it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Sounds good?
Sure. Yeah. Beautiful. Look, I think the key points with the phone inquiry, there are some differences between the way you interact with a buyer via the phone and then obviously the information you give them on an email. So you do have to distinguish between the two. I think with the phone inquiries, it's really important to be able to connect with the buyer when you first speak with them. Make sure if you do miss the call, you get back to them in a timely manner and those sorts of things.
What do you think is the response time, the ideal response time for a buyer inquiry?
Look, I think if it's during the day, I think you need to be, if you're out and about and on the phone, you need to be calling them back as soon as you see the missed call. I think that's just a natural reaction of a real estate agent. If you've got a missed call them back straight away.
Yes.
I think most people don't tend to expect a call or a call back that later in the evening, but I like to call people right up till about 9 o'clock. If they've called me, then I think it's only fair to call them back as much late as I can.
Great, so same day?
Yeah,
same day.
Always, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
So let's assume I've got through to you, so it's not a callback situation, but I think you're right, responsiveness in there is really important. They're almost always calling on a property.
Absolutely.
So they're not calling and saying, hello, I've got this buying need, have you got anything to suit? That's old school real estate. It's now, I'm calling you because I've got an interest in this particular property.
Yeah.
So it's very important, given that there's a level of focus and energy going into making that property a feature in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then from there, finding more about where they're at and then understanding how you could help them.
Yes, yeah. I think when you're on the phone and answering the inquiry, the parts that you kind of have to do at first of all are, one, you have to make sure you've got a lot of questions in there to be able to pull as much information from them. You do have to engage them in the property itself, but you've also got to find out why they've inquired on that particular property, ask them about certain attributes that they're looking for in a home as a whole, and then obviously answer any questions they have about that particular property, which is quite often why they call around price, or they're trying to work out the floor plan, the finishings, that sort of stuff. Normally, there might only be 2, 3, 4, 5 photos of the property internally and externally, so quite often they want to get a bit more information. So you've got to make sure you give a good balance between giving the information enough to keep them engaged and to get them into the property through the front door, and make them feel satisfied that they've got the right sort of information, but also pulling and drawing information from them so that you can then feed the excitement and energy that they've got around trying to find a home, and selling this particular property to them over the phone, so they then want to come through.
Yes, yeah. Knowing that when they come through, maybe there's a you got to navigate them to something else or recommend something else to them. But I think it's a really important point that the more that someone feels comfortable in that process, the more likely they are to show up at an open home or have a private inspection or something along those lines.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
The other slight challenge that I potentially see, if you don't do a good job of positioning that property, this could be a friend of the owner's who's ringing out of a mystery shop kind of point of view, and if the first thing you do is refer them on to something else, it's like, hang on, that's an issue, point one. The second thing that I see as a potential issue is it could be too interrogational. We're talking about quite a few questions. So it's pretty important that they flow and that you firstly give them some information that they've called about around that particular property, ask them some information, maybe top it up a little bit, and have a more conversational style.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're talking to somebody on the phone, you're always trying to get information from them. However, people are always calling up with a particular question in mind or particular 2 or 3 questions in mind. It's very easy for a real estate agent to have a conversation with someone for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about the property. It can be what they've been doing that day, along with bits about the property, pulling pieces in left, right and centre, other things they've seen over the coming weeks, just to kind of slowly piece together where they're at in the market at the moment, whether they're very active going through lots lots of properties, or whether this is a sole focus or one of the first properties they've called and inquired about. So you do have to give as much information as you can, and you've got to make sure that you're giving them the right sort of information and just keeping them involved throughout the call, so that they feel more and more trusting, and you can get a better response from them further down the track.
Yeah, look, one of the exciting things for me always is you don't know who this person is when you're on the phone. So you've got to assume that there's an opportunity here in some particular way to serve them in a super effective way.
Yeah, you've got to be careful. I find I always like to approach every buyer inquiry as not only a buyer inquiry but a potential seller further down the track. And like you mentioned before, they could be a friend of the owner's, they could be calling for all sorts of reasons, to see how you handle the inquiry, to see how quickly you get back to them on the inquiry. So whether it be a missed call, or a text message that they send you saying, can you give me a call when you're free, or however that inquiry comes in, you've always got to be thinking on your mind, okay, I've got to present myself in a light that is professional, diligent, informative, and then you're going to feel the benefits and reap the benefits from their reactions and what they give back to you.
Yeah, it's such an important point that sometimes you're in a busy day, you get a buyer inquiry, how quickly can I get this person off the phone, rather than have I really maximised this opportunity coming through, and that's really what you're talking about. So let's talk about the process. I've called in, I've asked you about a property, you've given me some details. And then would you check in to see and ask me some more questions?
Absolutely. So I think the first part of the conversation, the first part of the inquiry when you're speaking to somebody on the phone is really focused around the property itself. You really want to kind of soften them up, making them feel comfortable on the phone.
Yes.
Give as much information as you can, and sometimes you want to almost give them information they might not know that's not available on the internet.
Great.
So you might be able to talk about
non-obvious features.
Yes, you might be able to talk some of the features that aren't necessarily in the home, to talk about the surrounding area, get a bit of backstory about their what their situation is with families. Normally a good starting point.
Good.
Who else is going to be moving into the property with you, or where are you coming from? Are you coming from a larger home, downsizing? Ones that aren't necessarily invasive questions, but will give you an idea of their situation. Whether they're upsizing because they've got a kid on the way, then you can talk about some of those smaller features. You've got the third bedroom that might be not as large as the other two, so you can really set it off as a great nursery, great entry point moving into kids' rumpus room and that sort of thing further down the track. So,
or it could even be a situation where in the 3 immediate streets around this school, this is the first property that's come up in the last 18 months or the last 12 months. 3-bedroom, freestanding, and so on. So you're not just selling the property, you're selling them a little bit on that lifestyle component you were talking about to further add value and position the property in an effective way.
Yeah, you've got to be careful with the information, because sometimes you can not necessarily offend someone, but it might not be the lifestyle that they choose. So if you start talking about the bars and cafes and parks, and that might not be the sort of lifestyle they like. They might be quite introvert and not enjoy the outside life, but love the fact that there's the State Library and the river walks, or whatever the case may be. So you've got to make sure you've got that sort of information in a very non-intrusive way, and not give the wrong information across. Because what everybody else, people often think, okay, this is all the great features that we know, schools and kids, and then someone goes, well, I don't want to be near a school because of the parking and whatever their case may be. So you've got to make sure you get a bit of information before you start giving those sorts of pieces back to them.
Yeah, great. So a little bit of their lifestyle, where are they currently living at the moment, who else is living in the property, would you cover the main reason that they're looking at moving at the moment? Or
I think it's always nice to find out why they're moving and what it was about that property that brought them to the inquiry and made them inquire on the property, because I think that's really key. Because they might often say, they might not have necessarily a reason to move as such, but it might be the reason they're looking at this property is because it's the first one that's come up near their family. They might not necessarily be front of mind.
It could be a passive buyer.
It's a passive buyer who's seen something very particular about the home that they'd only move for that particular thing. So that's good to know. So you've got to kind of get a bit more of that information as well.
Yeah, fantastic, great. So after you've got that information out, added some value on the property, do you then move into a little bit more about their situation at the moment?
Yeah, so it's important to, like I said before, to think of every inquiry as both a potential purchaser and a potential seller. So you like to find out from them their position in the market at the moment. And you don't want to really be caught asking the standard questions which everybody will ask, which is, you know, do you need to sell before you buy? And, you know, is there a property that you know, what's your process at the moment? Are you thinking of selling and then buying and then selling? Have you sold your property? Those questions can often be a trigger point for a buyer to kind of put down a bit of a guard.
Yes.
So you've got to be a bit more fluid than that and ask questions like, have you seen any of your properties? Have you bid on any other properties in the market? And ask a simple question like, when does your current property settle, or have you already moved out of your home?
Yes.
And then you'll actually open the door to be able to ask the question without saying, do you need to sell your home?
Yes.
When does your property settle? Oh, we actually haven't put ours on the market yet. Okay, great. And have you already been speaking to some agents in the area about that? Do you have an understanding of where your current property sits in the market? You know, those sorts of questions that aren't necessarily invasive, but get them speaking more about their current home and what is it about that home compared to this one that makes you feel that this is the next home for you.
Great.
You know, and then you'll start to get a feel for it, and they'll feel more comfortable with you talking about their home, and then you can say, look, it'd be great to come through, have a look, give you an idea on the value of your home, to then be able to move on to the next step and buy something in the area.
Yeah.
So
excellent.
And you can also talk about, you know, seeing their home in the fact that once you've seen theirs, you get a better understanding of why they want to move on from there.
What next? Yeah. The thing I really like about this is you're not talking about buying and selling so much as talking about their move.
Yeah.
And that's the mode that they're in. So they know they need to buy, they know they need to sell. But in actual fact, what they're doing is they're moving the family, or they're moving from one place to another.
Yeah.
So I think that transition process is great. The other thing we talked about earlier before we started recording is the property fit side of things.
Yeah.
How once you get a better understanding of what they're looking for, you can start bringing in the qualities of the property that they've inquired on and get a sense of how those things are fitting together.
Yeah, and that's right, because you might find some buyers who are very needing of certain attributes of a home, so they might need that very large open plan living. They might have young kids. Some people who have a young baby, for example, don't necessarily need the very large, expansive open areas at the rear that people who have a kind of 3 to 7 year old kids that are going to be running around up and down all over the place, jumping over the couch, running out to the backyard, wanting to go into the pool area. The mum or the dad wants to be stood in the kitchen or the living room or wherever they're going to be able to see every aspect of it. So. Yeah. Getting that is a good strong point, and finding pieces like if there's a particular person who needs a bedroom downstairs, or they want to have the separation of living for kids, you then start using those little points that they've given you throughout the piece where you've asked the reasons for inquiring on the home and the reasons for the move from their current home, to get an understanding of how you can then start piecing those little bits into their key buying needs on the new home. So
there's a lot of value you can create in here, and a lot of shift in perception of who you are as a great agent to help them, and potentially even before they're interviewing you, they didn't know they were interviewing you, but you're actually being interviewed in the process of how would you handle this.
Yeah.
And a great thing, I would imagine, to get off that phone call and say, yes, I am going to inspect that property, or I am looking forward to the email you're going to send me with a link to the video or something along those lines, to also think when they put the phone down, if I was ever selling, this would be the kind of experience I would want in the marketplace for my property.
And that's what you want to leave people feeling, you know, regardless. And I very much enjoy having conversations with people, both if you speak to them and the property isn't right for them, because sometimes that does happen, you know, and it's really important to ascertain that, because you also, on the other side, don't want to be, you know, going through and taking somebody through privately, disturbing the owners potentially, or, you know, taking time out of your day if it's not necessary, if the property isn't right for them.
Yeah.
So there's two sides to it, but it's really exciting to be able to talk to somebody, and if they can come away from it feeling that you've added value to them, regardless of the outcome, whether the property is right for them or not, I think you've really made a massive impact on them, and it won't very often happen in the inquiries that they do make. Therefore, you are a step ahead, and you're creating. Yeah, you've got that point of difference.
Yeah, great standout. Great standout. Okay, excellent. Anything else you want to tip in from a buyer inquiry point of view? This has been fantastic, by the way.
No, I think just at the end of the day, it's about the time in which you take to respond to that. I think what we haven't broached on is just the standard email inquiry. I think the only thing I wanted to kind of bring onto those is quite often people try and hold some of the magic back. And draw people in. My feel is that if somebody inquires on a property and asks you for 4 or 5 different things, if you can come back to them and give them all the information they need, again, plus with a little bit more, asking for a phone call or asking for a contact back, you quite often get more from them by giving all the information. So if they want the square metre rates, the rental appraisal, the estimated selling range, all those things, I think it's really important to make sure you come back with all the answers, because you will definitely get more of a response back rather than if you just kind of give the standard generic canned response.
Yes.
People don't feel that that's personalised enough, and you don't get the connection that you might do if you are a bit more personalised with the emails back.
Yeah, correct. Or an email that says, call me if you've got any, call me, I'll be able to answer that for you.
Yeah.
So delivering something that adds value, shows you've got nothing to hide.
Yeah.
And also, if you'd like to talk more about some of the unique features of the property, I'd be happy to have a discussion with you around that.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah. And that's I think for me the key points when I'm just to kind of summarise on from my perspective of buyer inquiry is that I believe that when you're dealing with the inquiry, it needs to come from a perspective of you're helping them buy first, but you've also got to understand that you are constantly being interviewed as being someone who could be a potential seller, and you could be the person to help them sell. So from the moment you dial the phone, the moment you pick up the phone, respond to that text message, if they only want to be responded to via text, you've got to acknowledge that and respect that. You've got to make sure whatever they ask for, you're helping them with it, but you're constantly being interviewed, and from start to finish, you've got to remain that professional, diligent, informative agent that you want to be perceived as.
Fantastic. Mike, thank you so much for sharing buyer inquiry. It's going to make a big difference to the Marshall White way.
Beautiful.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.